Hello and welcome to episode 125 of Communicast, the podcast dedicated to enhancing communication skills. I'm your host, Scott D'Amico, president of Communispond. Today I'm joined by Scott McInnes, founder of Inspiring Change, a Dublin-based culture and internal communications consultancy. Scott helps senior leadership teams close the gap between the culture they have and the one they actually need to deliver their strategy. In this episode, we explore why communication is far more than simply sharing information. Scott explains how great leaders connect people to purpose, why clarity without emotion rarely inspires action, and how frontline managers play a critical role in translating organizational strategy into meaningful conversations. Whether you lead a team, communicate change, or simply want your messages to create more impact, this conversation is full of practical insights you can apply immediately. Let's dive in. Scott, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for asking me. It's great to be here, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Looking forward to it as well. Before we get too deep into it, if you could start off, just tell the listeners a little bit about you, your career journey, and the great work that you're doing today.
Sure. Well, I'll give you the quick kind of tuppeny bit version. I bizarrely started off my first kind of proper job was as a telecoms analyst, which was kind of weird because I think as I describe it a little further, we'll recognize that probably wasn't the place for me at all, working in a large consultancy in London. And somebody one day came past my desk and said, I think I heard that you've got a marketing degree, have you? And I said, yes. And they said, come with me. And that was the start of my career in PR. So we, unbeknown to most people in that organization, we had a small PR company in the middle of the business, and we worked with the likes of Hewlett Packard and Virgin and Daewoo and those types of organizations, big organizations. But it was a real kickoff for me in my career, and I recognized at that point that my big love was words and working with words and actually communicating with people. So that, as a starter for a career, consultancy and PR, was incredibly powerful. I then worked for the next probably 10 or 12 years in and around marketing and communications before joining AIB in what my children term my last proper job. And I was deputy head of internal comms and engagement in there for 5 years, where we had it was coming out the back of the crash. Things were a bit horrible. It felt a bit horrible. Staff were just very down, understandably. And we focused on three things. One, channels. How do we get our internal comms channels right? Secondly, leaders. How do we empower them? And I hope we'll get a chance to talk about the power of leadership and the criticality of leadership later on when it comes to communications. And strategy. So how do we make people see the red thread between the work that they're doing and the work the organization is trying to get done in order to drive engagement? And then in 2017, I set up Inspiring Change, which is where I am now. So I'm the founder and director of Inspiring Change. We help organizations to improve their culture by being more intentional about the culture they need to create in order to deliver the strategy they've got. So that's my role today. And of course, there's a huge amount of internal comms in there as well.
Fantastic. And think it all started from somebody just say, hey, you come with me. You have a degree.
Yeah.
We're gonna do some work together. That's a great journey.
Literally. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. Yeah, a moment in time, kind of a sliding doors moment.
And as I think about what you talk about, communication really is that connecting thread to success. A recent guest was talking about this, is that ideas are great, but for them to ultimately to lead to a breakthrough, it's about communication and not just one-to-one communication. As we think about organizations, especially large enterprises, it's often taken for granted the amount of thought that goes into communication with new initiatives, new branding, new leadership changes, whatever it may be, the mission, the vision of the organization. So much goes into communication, and especially with the work you're doing now, culture. To me, without strong, effective communication across your organization, you cannot have a strong culture. So, as I think about that, typically where you see strong culture, you see strong leaders. When you see strong leaders, you see strong communication. So when you hear that term, that somebody is a great communicator or that they have strong communication skills, what's the image that comes to mind for you?
I think it's somebody that has kind of communicates with clarity So that kind of left side of the brain, but also has that kind of emotional side of the brain as well, that human touch. I think the clarity and the importance of talking to head and heart, I guess, because that's what motivates people. We know it's not spreadsheets that motivate people. We know it's stories of experiences and things that have happened in organizations that where we're more empathetic of perhaps where people are, where we can understand where they're coming from. We can meet them where they are and bring them on the journey with us. I think that's really powerful because otherwise we're just simply shouting at people from afar and expecting them to come. Through really good, solid communications, we go to people and we bring them with us. We do that with clarity. So somebody that's very clear on the ask. We all know great storytellers, right? Who can tell a brilliant story, but actually at the end of them talking, we go, so what is it exactly you need me to do? Because that just wasn't clear at all. They just rattled off a whole load of stuff, which is very engaging and fun and exciting and wonderful. But actually, you've got to bring that story to a point where you go, and for us as a team, that means we've got to think about X, Y, or Z, or we've got to do or deliver X, Y, or Z. And I think, and you touched on it there, Scott, was that whole idea of red thread, of that red thread of communications back to or through values, purpose, strategy, helping people to see that the work that we're doing or what I'm talking about isn't just for the sake of talking about it, but it's because it's either in pursuit of one of our values or it's in pursuit of a pillar of our strategy. So I think they're probably for me some of the most important things that I like to see.
Talking to head and heart. I absolutely love that. I don't know if I've heard that expression before, but it really does combine the two components of the details, the data, the analytics, and then the emotions. And typically, if you want to move people to action, it is through that emotional lens more often than not, especially when it comes to change or persuasion, data, statistics, facts, typically just hardened pre-existing viewpoints and conditions. It's rare that you're going to change people's notions and move them to do something differently with data and facts. But when you can incorporate those stories and you have the very clear call to action afterwards, that's a lot of times a missing component. Like I said, people have this great presentation, they're effective communicators, they speak very clearly, they're articulate, they bring in stories, but they bury the ask or they just completely don't have an ask. So you need to make sure that you are following that up because communication without action is doesn't lead to anything. There's no results. That's ultimately when you get the results.
You've got to remember as well that, people in the workplace, we're reasonably selfish, and I'll use that word with a lowercase s, because actually what we really care about is kind of what's in it for me, what's the impact on me, what's this going to deliver for me or my family or the people that I'm looking after outside of the workplace. And I think being really clear on that as well, and that comes back, I guess, to that empathy piece and that piece of meeting people where they are. That's a job that leaders can do really, really effectively. That actually, like a people leader, like a local people leader, like my manager, my supervisor, my local boss, that a CEO, she can't do that because she doesn't know 200 or 500 or 10,000 people in your organization. So it's an incredibly important role that that leader has to be able to take and translate and contextualize org-wide comms in a way that really fits with the needs of not just their team, but the individuals in their team. Because I know that Sarah's dog has just died. I know that somebody else's son has graduated, so they're in great form. I know that somebody else is moving house, so they're under pressure. I know that somebody else is having a row with the other person in the team or somebody in risk. That knowledge is incredibly powerful because that allows me then, as a leader in that team, to communicate most effectively with that person.
That's something that I struggled with early on in my people leadership career was really getting to know the full person. I felt, oh, gosh, I don't want to get maybe too close to this person and learn too much and feel too much in case we have to do a change or if I have to, they're not performing, I need to let them go. It would be more challenging. And I was very fortunate to have a leader that really led with that, this idea of getting to know people so that to your point, you understand everything that's going on. It can help you, I think, better lead and coach them and communicate with them based on all of the things that are happening either at work with other teammates, with other divisions, and also at home. They have a sick kid, they're going through something personally, they lost a parent. All these stressors play into that. And as much as I think a lot of leaders want to pretend that the outside world doesn't exist, It 1000% exists, and people bring that to work with them. And so you need to be aware of it. And as we're talking about leaders, it's great transition to what I wanted to talk about next. If we think of the workplace today and the role that leaders have, the important role that leaders have, especially maybe frontline leaders, or if you're leading your frontline people leaders, if you think about these folks, what are some of the skills that really are critical for them to have today, or maybe something that you're seeing people are doing well and it's helping, or there's a gap out there?
I think it's really interesting. I think the kind of skills that you're referring to are skills that we have kind of historically and traditionally referred to as soft skills. And I hate that term because actually it's really bloody hard. Like communicating effectively is really, really hard. And we know that layer of middle managers, of frontline managers are like the most important people in the organization. And I tell them this all the time when we run workshops with people. You are the most important people in the organization because you're the ones that do that contextualization and the empathy and the authenticity and all of that. So having you invested in and trained is really important. But we know from research, from for example, the Gallagher State of the Sector research, which comes out every year about the state of the internal comms sector around the world, has been saying forever that leaders are saying they need more comms upskill, and actually organizations just aren't doing that. Why they're not doing it, I've no idea. But actually, they should be doing it. And I think what's particularly interesting, we just actually did a piece of research which listeners might be interested in. And actually, what we'll do is we've built a page for your listeners on our website, inspiringchange.ie/comms, and we'll stick the research up there. But there were two things particularly pertinent to leaders that the listeners might be interested in. That's number one, that when it comes to connection, which is what the research was all about, how do we continue to build and maintain connection in the world of work that we're in now? Leaders make or break connection in a team. So you've got one leader that might be doing it really well and another that just isn't doing it well at all. And they can unintentionally actually break down connection if they're not thinking about that and being intentional about it. And the other piece of intentionality is around hybrid working. And of course, many, probably the majority of organizations now, in some way, whether you call it flexible working, smart working, whatever you call it, you're doing some version of a couple of days in the office and a few days somewhere else, whether that be home or a different office or a hub or whatever. Leaders, people in organizations and organizations themselves are still not being kind of specific or intentional enough about what really good hybrid looks like. And how do we, as leaders and communicators, make sure that we're making the most of that? Because we're not going back to 5 days in the office. Much and all, as we've got CEOs in a few different sectors hitting nuclear buttons for an extra day or two a week or 5 days a week, it's not going to happen. And I think people are just going to leave organizations that do that to go to organizations that don't. Pandora's box has been well and truly opened. So we've got to think about how do we best make hybrid working work and not get panicky. We've been doing it for 36 months, right? That's all. 36 months. Before that, we were mostly remote during COVID. Before that, for 100 years, we worked 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. So we're kind of very early in this, what we keep calling new world of work. And it is new, it is still new. So leaders have a very big role to play in helping their teams to feel connected, to improve that communication in order to make hybrid working work really, really effectively.
So if I'm hearing correctly, one of the big roles for the managers and the frontline people leaders, it really is about fostering that connection directly with the employees and amongst the team. And it is very nuanced when it comes to working in a hybrid environment where maybe you're in the office and you have some employees that come in a few days a week, maybe some are in all the time, maybe some are never in, maybe some are in a couple days a week, all throughout the country. And typically what happens, and we hear this a lot, is that the people that are in the office tend to get more of the attention because that proximity bias, so to speak, where they're near the leader, they can pop in, they're walking around, kind of that management by walking around, so to speak. So they're getting that attention. So if you're a people leader and you have a hybrid workforce where maybe some people you see more frequently, some people you only see once or twice a year at big town halls or corporate meetings, you need to think about the type of engagement and how you're building that connection with them because it's likely going to be different than the somebody that's in the office or that you see much more frequently. So there's a strong intentionality that has to go along with how you're communicating when you have this team that's all over the place and working different types of schedules.
So I completely agree with all of that. And also, I'd add to that, you've also got to be able to, as a leader, be able to have a tricky conversation sometimes when perhaps people are just saying, "Oh, I'm just going to work at home today. I can't be bothered to come in." To have that conversation around, well, no, we said we were having our team meeting on our core day of a Wednesday, and we're all going to be in that day, and that's what we agreed, and that's what's going to happen. And we have to have that hard conversation sometimes. One of the people that we spoke to in doing our research in order to write the report gave us a story of when she was in the office one day, and there were three or four people on a conference call. Sorry, in a meeting. There were three or four people in a meeting, but they were on different floors of the building, and they just couldn't be bothered to go and sit with each other in a room. Now, to me, that's insane because I do think I'm not an advocate for 5 days back in the office at all. There's absolutely a place for hybrid working, but there is absolutely not a place for people to be doing that in an office when they should be coming together, sitting, and actually having a really good engagement together in a room with each other. But she was walking around the building and saw these people in separate meeting rooms on Teams to each other, which to me just seems mental. So being able to look at things like that happening and go, lads, seriously, don't do that. That's insane. That's a conversation needs to be had as well. That's an important. We think about communication being the top down broadcast. Actually, it's about the communication and those little micro moments of magic, if you like, that happen when we're together and don't happen when we're not. Even if we're together online, they still don't really happen because it's just different. It's just different.
When I hear things like that, to me, it speaks to leadership or perhaps a lack of leadership and setting clear expectations, holding people accountable where there's expectation either you're going to be in, you're going to come into this particular room for a meeting. And then also likely there's something going on with the culture where people don't feel excited might not be the right word, but they don't feel engaged enough to simply get up, go up a floor in the elevator to go do a different meeting room, whether it is they're completely overwhelmed and they're having to feel like they can multitask while they're in that meeting. They just simply don't like being around their peers and the leader because the connection hasn't been fostered or the trust has been broken. So I think there's a number of things that can lead into that. And as a leader, these are little things that you should be looking for as signs and signals to what's going on with the culture here. Can people not be bothered to come up before to come into a meeting room? Are people constantly trying to find ways to get out of doing X, Y, or Z? So I think you have to have that level of awareness of a leader to start to fix some of the things that may be broken.
And the lens that you're looking through is different, Scott, because you haven't got your team of 10 people sitting in front of you anymore 24/7. So, you've got to then look through a slightly different lens, be listening and watching slightly differently. I wonder why Scott always seems to always have his camera off. Is that a norm, a cultural norm that we want to have on our team, regardless of what the rest of the organization's doing? On our team, if we're on a Teams call, it's cameras on. The end. Do we all agree that that's the case? Great. And then we can hold each other accountable when that doesn't happen. So it's about, I think, for me, looking differently and listening differently, slightly, in order to pick up those tiny little nuanced things for sure. Yeah.
So shifting gears a little bit, Scott, we've been kind of talking about others. What does great leadership look like in others? What are some of the skills needed in the workplace today? If you think about your career and the success that you've had, and if I were to ask someone close to you, friend, family member, colleague, peer, what's kind of the key communication skill that has helped Scott get to where he is today? What would they share
I'm,
with me?
I'm laughing as you ask that question because I'm thinking you might get different answers, and some of them might not be very nice depending on who you ask. Um, I think for me, there's a confidence piece. I think if you've got confidence as a communicator, you're nearly halfway there. So for me, my role in running a consultancy that works with big organizations on aligning their cultures, you have to be very comfortable being up in front of people in workshops, up on stages, doing keynotes, and that kind of thing. That's really, really important. And even if it's just being comfortable in front of your team of 10 or having to go into the risk committee to present a paper, whatever it is, it's about having the self belief and just being comfortable in front of people. I think, and sometimes that means practice. That means actually, if I'm going on stage to do a keynote, that means a lot of practice. Sometimes if you know your content back to front, you don't need maybe that much practice, and maybe you're better just going on stage without that, because you're going to come across as more authentic. I think having a real passion for words is important. I cringe at some of the communications that I see. I cringe at the use of, and look, maybe this stuff isn't important anymore. Listeners, by all means, email me and let me know if you don't think it's important anymore. But things like punctuation, things like capital letters, things like using words, I love that quote by the 17th century French philosopher Blaise Pascal, and I'm butchering it slightly because it's slightly different in French, but he was writing a letter to his mother, and he said, "I'm sorry I had to write you such a long letter, but I didn't have time to write a short one." And that whole idea that editing takes time, but it's so important and every word matters. And I've taken that with me from where my career kicked off in PR. So actually reading back over things and thinking about the recipient. If I send this to somebody, where are they? What's their head at? Are they really busy? Does it need to be 2 lines? I sent somebody an email earlier on where I just put in the line item, what was the name of that awards category we judged last year? EOM, for end of message, and sent it. There was no "hope you're getting on well, how's things." Da, 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 da. It was a 1 line question and answer thing. So bang, done. So I think that whole idea of being, sympathetic to the recipient, understanding where they are, that's all really, really important, and has served me incredibly well.
So I hear confidence, clarity, conciseness, and I think layered across that is awareness of your audience, not only just who you're speaking to, but one of the key things you hit on is, quote, where's this person at? Meaning, could be physically. I know this person's traveling. They're in an airport. They're going to be reading this on their phone. So I need to be very short, very clear, very concise. Or it's a Friday afternoon, 4 p.m. before a holiday weekend. Maybe now's not the right time to set out a mission critical message. I want to time this so that I know more people are going to have eyes on it, going to pay attention to it, be in the right mindset to receive it. So yeah, when you're doing all these things, you got to look through it through a number of lenses. And when it comes to confidence and comfortability, one thing I always say is especially when it comes to communication, there's a difference between being comfortable and confident in doing it and actually being good at it. There's lots of great, comfortable, confident presenters, but they're not great at getting their message across. So this idea of, yes, we want to feel comfortable. We're going to continue to feel more comfort as we do it and get more reps in, but you need to layer on skill building to make sure that you actually are doing things in the best way possible so your message lands.
And I think when you become more comfortable, I think you get to a place where, I was actually, quick story, I was on stage recently for Boots, who's a big chemist, a big pharmacy brand here in Ireland and the UK. And they invited me to come along and speak to 260 of their pharmacists about change. And I spoke about change, but in the context of Pilates, and which was a bit of fun. So all this kind of thing. And in the middle, the head of comms said to me after, "The funniest thing I've ever seen was you on stage in front of 260 people having a conversation with yourself." Because I was looking on the screen, the comfort screen, the monitor, about what was coming up next. And I was saying to myself, will I do this? Will I do this with them? Will I not do this with them? What do you think? Will we do this? And then I said, do you want to try Are we friends? Do you want to try something new? Do you want to try have a bit of fun? And they went, yeah. And I went, okay, well, let's go then. And I got them on their feet and we had them touching their toes. And it's just those little bits of just being so comfortable in your own skin that you're happy just to have those conversations, pick out people in the audience. Somebody drops something, I'll pop down and grab that for you. That you've not gone up there with a plan, and I'm arriving with the plan and I'm going to execute the plan, and that's the end. And then I'll say thank you very much and leave. that
Hmm.
you can interact and have fun with the audience. And I think that you can only do that if you know your, if you know your content kind of back to front, and if you're comfortable doing that, just because you've done it, as you said, lots and lots of times.
The preparation and the comfort level that comes with doing it over and time again leads to that flexibility and adaptability. And
Yeah.
that's I think really what separates excellent communicators apart is the ability to adapt and to be flexible in real time. Where you show up to a presentation and they are like, Scott, I know we had given you 45 minutes, something changed, now you have 20.
Yeah.
Or, hey, we're planning on 30. Can you stretch this out to 90? Right. So, different things come up when you are out there, whether you're doing keynote speeches, you're going in and presenting to senior leadership. You need to be ready to adapt at a moment's notice and to be prepared for that. So, as you've thought about what you're going to share, what's the briefing of this? What's the short version of this? What's the version if I need to extend out? And to your point, yeah, you know what? I'm getting this vibe from the audience that I think I could do this. I could try
Bit
something
of
a little
fun.
bit different, right? And have some fun with it. Or, you know what? This is not the right group to try and do this type of exercise. So I'm going to pivot
So,
and do something different. So, yeah, as you get those reps in, you know your content. You haven't memorized your content. You don't want to memorize because that's just a recipe for disaster. Because as soon as you
yeah.
miss one word, your brain short circuits and you're a mess. But you know your content, you've practiced it, you've done these types of things a lot. That's where you get to the point where you're flexible and adaptable.
Yeah, and all of that, all of what you've just described there is true, whether you are in a one-to-one, whether you're in a team meeting with 8 people, or whether you're in front of 500 people in an auditorium. It's all exactly the same.
That's why I love what I do so much. The beauty of communication is that it's so adaptable and transferable from work to home, from home to work, from one on one to speaking to a large audience at a global conference. These skills you can use and adapt and bring to all aspects of your life.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Scott, who has been someone from throughout your career that's had an influence on your communication style? Maybe it's something that you've just picked up from them along the way, tweaked it, made it your own, and now it's part of your tool belt, so to speak.
I'm gonna pick, if I can, I'm gonna pick 2 people.
I'll
And
allow that.
the first one goes back to that very first job in PR. And I was actually only telling, we've got a new staff member joined this morning, almost straight from college, first job. She's doing our digital marketing for us, and brilliant. She's doing really, really well. But there's something that I just went, oh, it just needs a bit more tweaking. And I remembered, and I shared with her a story of a lady, Laurie Costello. She was American, or is American, because she still is American. And she was working in London with us. And I remember bringing her, I was 22, and I brought her a piece of work. And she said, well, there's kind of typos and spelling mistakes in this. And I said, oh, yeah, it's not finished yet. I just wanted to make sure that, you could see it and you thought it was going in the right direction. And she said, do me a, just can you do me a favor? Just bring me the best version of what you can do up to the point that you can do it, and then let's have the conversation. And I remember being really pissed off at the time, going, well, but actually, I've taken that with me, and I shared that with Amisha this morning, 25 years later, more than 20, 30 years later. And I shared that with her because actually there's always little bits, and I shouldn't have to go in and find the little bits that are wrong or different. Actually, bring me the best version that you can do, and then let's have a conversation. So I thought that was really powerful. The other one, you fast forward 20 years to my time in AIB. So my boss in AIB was Anth Burrows. He'll be delighted that I'm name dropping him on here. But he was incredibly brave. We both joined that organization around the same time. Just after the crash, things were very iffy. People were very down. The culture was like draping a wet blanket around your shoulders. But he was incredibly, incredibly brave. The things that we did as a team, even the fact there was a team of 10 of us in engagement and comms, was brave because no other organization had 10 people for an organization of 10,000 people. So, or a team of 10 for an organization of 10,000 people. So even building that team was brave. But then going in many ways against the grain of what the organization thought it needed because it didn't really know what it actually needed from a comms and engagement perspective. That's what he was bringing. So he did lots of things that raised eyebrows. He did lots of things like running a conference for 3,000 people leaders, having to keep it on the down low because what if the shareholders here? All these types of things that were just the right thing to do. And he just said, you know what? There may have been an expletive or a bad word in there. And he just said, I'm just doing it. I don't care. I'm just doing it because it's the right thing to do. And the other project, probably the project that I'm most proud of that he sponsored in there, was a tone of voice project. It was a very, it was, the way that we communicated and spoke to each other as colleagues, even using that word, as people that work together, was kind of old school. You know, henceforth and forthwith and pursuant to my earlier email, and you're looking at the guy sitting beside you going, Jesus, I've known you for 5 years. Why are you sending me emails like that? When we can actually just use, contractions, and we can say weave and I'll, and we can talk in first person, and we can do all those things that are just natural outside of work. But how's about we bring that into work? And we trained 10% of the staff, 1,000 people, in how to use these new guidelines, which went on to become the guidelines for the external comms as well. And it was amazing the difference that made. And that was all driven by him and him being brave in how he turned up at work and how he drove things forward.
Love it. And that last story reminded me of, I think it's from one of Malcolm Gladwell's books. And he talked about an airline that had had a couple of, terrible crashes in a short period of time. When they were reviewing the black box data, they could tell very clearly that because of the way that it was structured from pilot to co-pilot, and the titles and the hierarchy there, and especially with the culture, is that the co-pilot, you could tell, knew something was wrong, but did not feel comfortable trying to correct the pilot. And they went through, and I think they did the exercise of eliminating the titles. Because sometimes when you have that over formality, whether it is structure, hierarchy, titles, org charts, but even to what you said around the formality of how you communicate, sometimes when you create all that structure, people do not feel as comfortable raising concerns, bringing forward new ideas. So it may sound like, oh, that's very trivial to be able to say I'll versus I will, but it goes to culture. What type of culture do we want to create here? Do we want where people feel comfortable? People are going to express themselves. People are going to raise their hand and say something when they see something wrong. Or are we just simply concerned about formality? Now, that is very cool. Scott, as we're wrapping up here, two questions. You can tackle them in either order. One, if people want to get in touch with you, learn a little bit more about the work that you're doing, what's the best way for them to do that? I'll put the information in the show notes, and I'll also put that link you mentioned earlier in the show notes. And then what piece of closing advice would you have for folks listening to this around the importance of the skills we talked about today?
Okay, so let me answer them in that order. So as I mentioned earlier, the research we'll put up on that page, inspiringchange.ie/comms. So we'll put up the research up there. If you want to get in touch with me on LinkedIn, there's a link up there as well. I'm very active on LinkedIn. And also, if something here has kind of tweaked a thought in your head and you want to get in touch and have a chat, you'll find a Calendly link on there. I don't know why they made Calendly so hard to say. A Calendly link on that page as well. So that's all there. Inspiringchange.ie/comms. Your last question, I've forgotten what the last question was, Scott.
Piece of closing advice around the importance of these skills.
So I think that there is a critical importance of these skills, whether you are starting off in your career or whether you are mid or late career. It's about recognizing that communication skills are really, really important and that they don't come naturally to everybody. We know that because we've seen them, and maybe you've worked for them, where people have worked through an engineering team, a risk team, a legal team, an HR team, and they've just gotten to a point where they're now the team leader, but they've never been trained in communication skills. They've never been trained in leading a team or any other kind of people skills. So they do need training. But it's important then to remember that we talk about training. We generally think about that as being classroom training. Now, if you think about that 70-20-10 model of training or skilling up, 10% is classroom, 20% is interaction with other people, and 70% is just your experience of doing things. And I think in there, probably one of the words that I use the most when I'm out doing sessions with leaders is awareness. Being self-aware enough to look at people's faces when you say something and go, oh, that didn't go down very well. I wonder, could I have said that better? I wonder, could I have answered that question better? I wonder, should I have prepared better for that meeting? I wonder, should have, I wonder, should have, I wonder, should have. Oh, to the time, the answer will be, you did absolutely fine. But at least you're asking yourself the question. And that idea of asking yourself the question, I think, is at the core of leadership. That whole idea of self-awareness, absolutely critical.
Fantastic advice. You have to be aware in order to grow. It's a fantastic skill in so many aspects of life, but especially when it comes to communication, this idea that I'm going to not only look at myself, but look at others. This idea of self awareness will lead to awareness of others, realizing I need to improve. I'm not seeing the results that I want from my messaging, my presentations, my communications. Yes, I'm going to work on some things myself, but if I'm not paying attention to how those things are landing with the audience, whether it's one on one and a phone call, sometimes you say something, you just get a dead, awkward silence, and you're like, huh, is it because of that or because of what I said?
Yeah.
In the audience, you always hear about looking at the body language. Are people tuning in? Are they tuning out when you're presenting? Do I need to adapt? So, really focusing on yourself, focusing on others will help to grow those skills, whether you are fresh out of school, mid career, or an executive. These are things that really should never stop developing. They're going to slightly change how you're going to use them and maybe what avenues you will use depending on your experience and the level within the organization. But these are always skills that continue to need growth and development.
Yeah.
Scott, thank you so much for joining me. Really enjoyed our conversation. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a joy.
Special thanks again to Scott McInnes for joining me and sharing so many practical insights on leadership communication, organizational culture, and creating connection at work. One of my biggest takeaways from our conversation is that communication isn't successful because information was shared. It's successful because people understand where they're going, why it matters, and what they should do next. Great communicators don't just inform people, they create clarity, they create connection, and ultimately, they inspire action. Be sure to subscribe to Communicast so you don't miss future conversations with communication experts, business leaders, and coaches who are helping redefine what great communication looks like. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating or review. It helps others discover the show and supports our growing community. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.